Hello everyone, here we are. I have finished Socialites 2 and I did set it in a spool setting. It's all of the blocks and I saw somebody say, hey, Kimberly Jolly on Fat Quarter Shop had another quilt set up in a spool pattern. I used that as inspiration and made my own. This is all out of scraps. Now, if you remember, last year, right around this time a year ago, I was about 2 weeks after an 8-week long COVID sickness. And I was well on my way to having long COVID. When Socialites 2 started, I believe it was in October, I had a terrible time trying to sew. And it was kind of like starting all over again because I really struggled reading the pattern, interpreting it, trying to figure out the cutting instructions. So I thought, you know what? This may be the time to learn how to do things maybe a little bit more properly with the weekly how-to videos that Kimberly Jolly did on Fat Quarter Shop. And she does that periodically for sew-alongs. This is a free sew-along. Each block had a free pattern. It's still up. And she has the how-to. Okay, I realized after I got all done with this that I had fallen into some really bad habits, or maybe I never learned how at the beginning on accurately sewing and having accurate quilt blocks. Some of these blocks, there's a little bit of a struggle, and I'll do a little bit more of a close-up at the end here. Some of the points got chopped off. Some of them were the wrong size. Everything I had to learn all over again. So I want to talk about what my takeaways were that I need to incorporate in future projects. So I want you to see that I did free motion quilting on it. It is not bound. I just pinned it on the design board next to my little spool sew along that I'm also doing with Fat Quarter Shop. That is a Lori Holt pattern. Sew Scrappy spools, again, using up all of the stash and scraps that I have. And I just thought, I've got a spool theme going this year. So the first thing I learned, I'm left-handed, and I realized, I don't do this 100% yet, but I'm learning. And that is how to properly cut blocks and patches accurately. So I have some of my favorite rulers, and I am a huge fan of Creative Grids. I can see it very well. I like the black and white marking. I love the paint for all the different lines. On the back, it's got these anti-slip discs that are already in place and don't interfere with marking, because what I have done for most of my life is use the cutting board. I know it's wrong, but I think it has to do with being left-handed, and maybe I'm slightly dyslexic because trying to put this down and measure across here, I made a million cutting mistakes. So I would use the cutting board and I would watch videos, and I never understood how to accurately cut using the ruler. I've got a million rulers. I've bought a million over the years. It's only in the last little bit that I figured out, after being a quilter for 25 plus years, maybe more like 30, what these lines mean and how to use the ruler by putting your fabric in the back and measuring it across and cutting. I'm still figuring out, but I can tell you right now, that is probably the number one thing for accuracy, is cutting it with the ruler properly, or using a die cutting machine or a Cricut to get your pieces really within threads of being the right size. So I'm still learning. But I've watched Kimberly do it a lot. I've watched a lot of other people do wonderful, wonderful tutorials. And I'm like, okay, that is my next goal, is to use the ruler and not the mat. The other thing is, being left-handed, I pin items with my left and I put it this way on the fabric. Well, it's hard to pull as you sew the way the throat of a machine is set up, because it's really for right-handed people. And I noticed that Kimberly Jolly was pinning items on this side. So using her right hand to pin, and then as the seam is being done, she just quick pulls them out, and she's not having to stop and pull them out. Well, I am on the other side, because when I jerk the pin, the whole seam is moved pretty crooked. The other thing is I'm showing you is that I have a very fine pin with a beautiful silicone head. It's so fine, it barely shows up. These are called magic pins, and they come in this fun little like coffin shape, and they are so fine. I bought these a while ago because I like the top is silicone. You can iron on it. My friend also has a quilt shop at Halo Inspirations, and she used these for a specific project, and I thought I got to have them because I needed new, sharper pins. Well, the fineness is what is making these tiny 6.5-inch blocks line up right, is using these fine, sharp pins. Now, they bend, and you do not want to run over them with your sewing machine, or they will bend right in half. What a difference. Number one, pinning, because I used to never pin. And number two, having this very, very fine and sharp pin, how much it worked. I always wondered why I like paper piecing so much better before I was sick with long COVID, because everything came out perfect points, sharp, the right size. And I realized as I was working on this, it's the accuracy. You use the foundation paper to make everything line up and trim it to the right size, and your seams are perfectly in the right spot most of the time. And maybe this is going to help me understand why I had such trouble with the Dear Jane quilt prior to getting sick, and I might revive it in this 2024. We'll see. The other thing I learned while doing this is that many patterns write the patches to be sewn together, and that they're probably oversized, and you have to remember to trim each unit down to the size indicated in the pattern. Read the pattern closely, mark it, do a test block even, make notes. Certain types of construction is not my favorite, but if you know that going in, you might be able to refer to, say, a half square, triangle, or flying geese method that you like better than what the pattern writer is saying. But trim each unit. I did not do that a few times, and I had a mess. And I realized that that was a habit I had gotten out of, was reading the patterns very closely. And what I was doing was guessing by what my memory banks told me, and that led to many problems. Or maybe I made assumptions. So as I was humbled and making this really pretty quilt in the end, I realized starting over meant I could relearn better habits. I also encourage people to press. With a hot iron is my favorite in between things. I do have a rolling, a rolling seam press, but it's wooden, it doesn't get hot. It's okay for paper piecing. A lot of people finger press, but I have arthritis in my fingers and it hurts way too much. So I have a little tiny iron, a little little one, and it's right by my sewing machine with a wool mat. That's another thing to get your seams open and pressed very flat. And starch. Now, starch, you need to do it carefully because you can stretch if you do it as you go, but a lot of people pre-starch their fabric. I may start doing that. And the other thing is be very careful if you use steam so you don't distort your seams and make it not accurate. So there you have it. There are my takeaways on some of the things that I needed to relearn, some of the things I need to still work on, and breaking the habits. Let me recap. I needed thin pins, magic pins they're called, and you can find them at your local quilt shop, but they are lovely. I would totally recommend that. The other thing is sewing your seam accurately. Did I forget to mention this? I think I did. And you need a seam guide. Now, whether you have a 1/4 inch foot on your machine or a seam guide like Lori Holt's seam guide, you can even use tape on your machine, whatever it takes so you have an accurate 1/4 inch. Pat Sloan has a great video on that. I'm currently using the Lori Holt seam guide to sew an accurate seam. The third thing is cutting and trimming as you go. The other part I'm going to tag on to that is using your ruler instead of the mat to cut your pieces out so that everything is as accurately cut as possible. That's why I liked foundation paper piecing so much, and English paper piecing I do enjoy also, but it's not my first love as much as sewing tiny, accurate, super sharp points with foundation paper piecing. It's because of some of these bad habits I have with regular cutting your patches accurately and sewing them straight. Use a seam guide. We talked about you learning to use the ruler properly. That's my goal for this next year. So will Dear Jane come back out? I don't know. I am still thinking on that and debating. And some people will do what Brenda Papadakis called the Baby Jane, because these are 6.5 inch blocks. The Dear Jane are 5 inch unfinished. So they're 4.5 inch blocks. They're tiny, they're intricate, and I got frustrated before I got sick. So she called that people's quilts after the original Jane Stickle quilt Baby Janes. Mine might be a real Baby Jane, like not in all of the quilt blocks being made, and just my version of it with the ones that I've made. Or I may go through and find some paper piecing methods. The applique is also another problem. So the Dear Jane humbled me. So did long COVID. And I realized I needed to work on accuracy. So the last tip I have before I go is watch somebody who is a really good piecer put YouTube tutorials out. You can tell I'm not doing videos on how to accurately piece. I'm giving you tips because I want you to go watch the pros, the Kimberly Jollies, the Karen Brown of Just Get It Done Quilts, the plethora of people. Lori Holt, her videos are phenomenal, and she shows you how to sew, pin, cut accurately. So those are my tips. Please, if you're not doing any or all of them and you're frustrated with your quilting like I was, you have to relearn a few things. And that's what I've done since I started this particular sew along. These particular quilt blocks is what I'm currently working on, and I'm trying to employ every single one of these ideas into my quilt making. So I hope that this was something that you were able to take a few things away from it and employ to see if you can get more accurate piecing. And until next time, make quilts, be creative, and have a wonderful day. I'll go ahead and give you a few close-ups to see the quilt closer in some of my free motion quilting, but look for the problems And what did I learn from all of this? So have a great week, everyone.